So I'm Sulima Malzin, and I have the distinct pleasure and the privilege of working with Kay and Steph, Maya, Barry, and Devon. All of them were working on long-term projects. And so we were going to see where that was going. And there was also another woman writer in that group, Charlotte Finn. So Charlotte and Devon have both published their books, both memoirs. Maya is in the process of getting her novel up and out there. And Kay is just working on projects that are quite amazing. Barbara is a friend of mine from high school, and reconnection after long absences. Barbara has also written a book about volunteerism, which was her second career. And Yvonne was also part of our group back in the day. It's been a while. It's been a while since we've done that, but I'm just amazed at everything that has taken place since. So that's pretty delightful. My website, sulimamalzin.net, is devoted to getting people to look at what's going on in the world, maybe through a little different lens, using art, poetry, music. And we feature every so often, we feature something we call Conversation with Friends, which is what we're doing today. And that usually does feature an author, a theater performer, someone of interest. And so here we are today with this beautiful person of interest, Devon Ervin. And as we know, she has written a memoir that is very moving, that is very, it's very tender, it's very moving, it's very amazing. And I don't know how many of you have read it or are in the process of reading it. Yeah, how many have read it? One, yeah, okay. Trish, Molly, I can't see your hands. Are you readers, or have you not read it yet?
I haven't read it yet, but will.
Uh-huh. Okay, and Trish?
I'm trying to figure out here.
Trying to figure out how to do this.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yes. Okay, yeah. No, I've ordered it, but I haven't had time to read it yet.
Uh-huh. Okay. Chrissy, how about you?
Yes, I have read it.
You have.
I read it in the manuscript form.
Uh-huh. Okay. And Barb, you haven't read it yet.
No, not yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that kind of tells us where we are. Devon, do you want to? Well, where is Yvonne? Did we lose her?
Oh, she's here.
She's here. Okay, she's not on my screen. There she is. So, Yvonne, have you read it yet, or not? We may not get an answer.
Maybe
You're muted, Yvonne. So, well, all right. Devon, do you want to tell us a little bit about how this book, this fabulous book, came to be written?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Sulima, for inviting me to be here. I'm really delighted to do that. Boy, the book came out of a lot of things. I think it didn't start as a book. It started as a bunch of journal entries of just kind of trying to make sense of what was happening in my world after my former husband had his first stroke. As I always do, I look to books as a way to kind of figure out how I fit in the world or connect with whatever's happening, if it's parenting or whatever, I look for books. And after Tim had his first stroke, we were both in our 40s. I didn't know anything. I mean, I was pretty ignorant about strokes, other than my grandfather had died from a stroke, but I didn't really even know what it was. So I started looking for books that could help. And I found a lot of books about strokes and for stroke survivors, but not much that really spoke to caregiving. And so I felt a little lost, really lost. All of my friends were, deep in the throes of careers or parenting, and I was, dealing with a disabled husband. So I basically started writing the book that I needed to hear and I needed to read. And that's kind of how it started. And at the beginning, when I was writing it, it was really, the intention was for it to be this kind of, woohoo, we went through this really bad thing and everything got great again. And then 5 years in, he had a second stroke and everything did not go great again. And so it turned into a very different book. And so that's kind of the journey. I won't spoil the spoiler, we do get divorced, but it's
Don't give it away.
it's all over everything. So it's on the cover, but so it's, just trying to find our way through that and to do it in a really different way than what's typically done in this culture of, the winner and loser kind of narrative that exists around divorce. And how do we do this in a way that honors both of us, but gives me my life back and gives him his life back as well.
And supports your children
Oh, absolutely.
in such a beautiful way that you remain a family.
Yeah.
That's I wonder, would you want to just read the preface, the prologue, you call it the prologue, or the book starts when you talk about how you and Tim met and what your life was like before this happened? I think it is such a beautifully revealing piece of the book. And it really sets the stage for, I don't even know how to describe it. Maybe one of you can do a better job of that. Kay, I know you've really read the book intensely.
I think the preface gives us an understanding from the beginning of how much they lost.
That's it.
And and then when you get to the losing your best friend, that brings it up again. But until then, we wouldn't have any idea what you had lost. So I really appreciate that you have the foreword.
Yeah, and I did the prologue and very intentionally because I didn't want people to villainize him. And, as he became this kind of angry, not so nice person, I didn't want them to look at him and see him as the bad one. It's like, that's not, the losses were great on his side as well. I'm happy to read it. We'll see if I can get through it without crying. It's harder for me to read these happy ones than the more traumatic ones, but I will. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, this is prologue. When asked how we met, Tim would always chuckle and say we met in a bar. I would give him a look of mock exasperation and say we were always destined to meet. He'd smile and wait for me to tell the rest of the story. Yes, we technically met in a bar, but not that kind of bar. It was the early 90s. I was in my late 20s, and we were both part of a large group of friends who met on Tuesday nights at a local brew pub for pizza and beer. It was a meetup before meetups were a thing. It started with a group of guys who worked in the tech industry who liked to brew their own beer. I didn't drink beer or brew it, but was dating someone who did. So each Tuesday around dinner time, I found myself at a bar with an ever-expanding group of friends who showed up for food, beverages, and lively conversation. Tim and I knew each other indirectly for a year or so before we actually spoke to one another. I knew he was an engineer. I knew he was divorced. He knew I was dating a guy he knew from a previous workplace. He knew my cousin. We had friends in common. We played flag football together with a large group. We had been circling around each other for years without even really noticing. After my relationship with my boyfriend ended, Tim and I had our first real conversation at the brew pub on a Tuesday night. We clicked. We clicked so much that I got scared and stopped going to the brew pub on Tuesday nights. I knew I needed to heal my heart and do some inner work before I jumped into another relationship. After 6 months, I felt the urge to go back. I wanted to see Tim. I wanted to know if there was anything there. I wanted to take that great big step. And even though I was scared, I showed up. We talked. We still clicked. That night was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. 4 years later, we stood on a bluff on the island of St. Thomas, reciting wedding vows to each other in front of 4 of our closest friends. It was magical and casual and beautiful and heartfelt, and 1,000 rainbows all lit up with love. As part of our ceremony, we read personal letters to each other. All these years later, I can still hear him reading these words. This is the letter he wrote. Devon, the first thing I noticed about you was your quiet voice. I had to strain to hear you over the noise of our friends at the Bridgeport, but I'm glad I did. As I listened to you, I realized that your voice was soft, but your ideas and your wisdom were clear and strong. Your convictions about the importance of spending time with the people we care about, helped me change my life. I love you for many reasons. The beauty you have on the inside and the outside, the insight you have into people that always amazes me, the inner strength that you've drawn on to go back to school, to build a life and a career that truly fulfills you, and the genuine love and care you show toward your family and friends. But the most important reason may also be the most selfish. I know that I'm a better person with you in my life than I am without you. My whole life is better with you in it. You make our house a home. Without you, it's bricks and glass and wood, mostly green, but maybe a little gray. With you, it's a sanctuary, a place to renew myself, a place for us to share thoughts and love, a place to grow and learn to face the world tomorrow better than we did today. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that there's no one I'd rather have by my side to travel into it with me than you. I'm looking forward to the journey. Thank you for sharing it with me. I love you. That's the end of the letter. It says, it was a magical time. He was a software engineer doing work he loved. I was a psychotherapist doing work I loved. Dual income, no kids. We traveled a lot. We spent a lot of time with friends. We focused on our careers and seeing the world and playing as much as possible. We shared inside jokes. We had a beautiful home in an old neighborhood, and we loved our lives. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was solid. It was strong and solid and beautiful. About a decade later, my biological clock unexpectedly kicked into overdrive, and I found myself constantly thinking about raising a child. It wasn't necessarily a drive to give birth, but more of a deep longing to raise a child. We had decided before we married that if we were to have children, it would be through adoption. For years, we had both been on the fence about having kids. I felt a pull to adopt from an orphanage. Tim felt the pull to do his part to stop population growth. Adoption was a good fit for both of us, and yet, at the time of our marriage, Neither one of us was ready to start a family. So all those years later, I was a little surprised to find myself thinking about raising a child. I was emotional and overwhelmed, and frankly, a little afraid to bring it up. Tears would come to my eyes when I would think about it. It was visceral and surprising, and I kept wondering how the hell I was going to bring it up with my husband. One fall evening, a few months after my biological clock kicked in, we were having a lovely dinner in our favorite restaurant, a New Orleans-style bistro in the northeast section of our city. We were sitting at the bar in a tiny little restaurant, talking, making plans for the holidays, and enjoying some amazing food. We were listening to jazz and soaking up the ambiance in that beautiful space. The conversation meandered to gift ideas for friends and family. When trying to think of something to get for his parents, Tim said they'd really be happy if we had a baby. He may have been a little drunk and may have been half joking, but I was flooded with emotion and started crying. I told him what I wanted, how I wanted to raise a child. I wanted that experience. I believed he and I would be great parents. He was stunned and a little quiet. I wiped my tears and asked him to please think about it, and he agreed to do so. After a couple of months of processing, he let me know he felt ready to raise a child. He also felt ready to raise a child. I can still remember in vivid detail the moment when he shared that news. We were so excited, so over the moon, so ready for the next phase in our lives together. We took the plunge and started the long road toward adoption. We dove into the process head first, choosing an agency, taking classes, reading books, telling our families and friends, and making changes in our home. We were going to create a family. We were connected. We were happy. We were living our happily ever after love story.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Then it goes into a very different part of the book. Well, I guess I can continue to read, or I was going to read a few more stories, but or I can answer questions. I'm open
Well,
to.
talk a little bit about, I think it's, for those that haven't read the book, that it's divided into sections,
Mhm.
and they're all referencing tidal waves. Really, there's the sneaker wave, and the first one when the first stroke hits, and but reading the prologue that way gives us, as Kay said, it really tells us what a terrible, terrible loss occurred, and what terrible, terrible grief had to come with that loss. This was, and as I've talked about the book to friends of mine, I said, this was almost an idyllic marriage,
Mm.
and to have it just wiped out, like a tsunami. It was, it's a bold book. It's a bold book and a beautiful book. So maybe you want to just share something from each of the sections, Devon? Is that?
Yeah. And I think at the time, well, I won't read the opening chapter in the first part of the book is him having the first stroke. And that was in January 2008. So we had been together for 14 years at that time. 14 years at that time. So we're pretty far into our life together when that happened. And we were on the wait list to adopt from China at that time. And we'd been waiting for a few years. And so I'm going to start, before I read a story, I'm going to read a poem that I think represents kind of my experience of that time. So Tim had this very large stroke. He eventually he does get better, but I think, well, I'll just read the poem. It's called After the Stroke. His body, near fatally broken, heals and lives. It's a miracle. What a blessing. Everyone breathes a collective sigh of relief, except his wife, who lost her husband. She is slowly breaking apart, drowning in pain as the crowd continues to cheer. So I'm going to read a story from 3 months after his first stroke. And just for context, he had a stroke that was centered in the language center in his brain and wiped out his ability to speak and understand language. And this is a story called The Alphabet Song, which is him learning to speak again. It's a lovely spring morning and traffic is light as we make our way across the river and into the heart of the city. It's been 3 months since Tim's stroke, and I'm driving him to a speech therapy appointment. We make this trek several times a week, and I wonder how other stroke survivors do this if they are unpartnered or if their partner has to work. I'm pretty sure all the speech therapy appointments are scheduled during the day. The thought leaves me feeling disturbingly sad. Tim is making some progress in his ability to speak. Because of his apraxia, his mouth does not remember how to form sounds, and some information is currently not moving from his brain to his mouth. I'm not sure if it's memory loss or signals not getting through. Consequently, he's learning to speak all over again, one painstaking sound at a time. It's excruciating to watch. Hold your tongue this way. Hold your lips in this position. Touch the roof of your mouth with your tongue. Close your teeth and blow out, etc., etc., etc. I'm so astonished by how freaking complicated it is to make even the simplest meaningful sound with our mouths. Tim is learning to say the ABCs. He's able to sing the children's alphabet song, but can't yet speak it. Evidently, music lives in a different part of the brain, not in the language center where Tim sustained the most damage during his stroke. He can sing the song, but can't actually understand what he's singing, and speaking each letter on its own is still a huge challenge. Because Tim has always been super motivated, practicing speech exercises is something he willingly and diligently does, day after day after day. He completes every single assignment given to him. As we drive along, he is practicing the alphabet. A, B, C, D, K, 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 L, 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 M, 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 M. I look over at him and ask him to stop. He looks at me with confusion. He repeats the letters again. A, B, C, D, K, 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 L, 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 M, 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 M. I ask him again to stop, this time with more irritation in my voice. I try to explain that what he is saying is not the alphabet. What he is doing is laying down memory that is just plain wrong. I'm not kind. He ignores me. He truly believes he is saying the alphabet just as he knows it and hears it in his mind. I'm so frustrated I could scream. I threaten to tell his speech therapist what he's doing and feel strangely comforted by this, as if I truly have an ally in this hellish little nightmare we're in. He shuts up and we ride the rest of the way in uncomfortable silence. We arrive at the rehabilitation center in a cloud of frustration. He's frustrated with me. I'm frustrated with him. We're both frustrated with all things related to this stupid stroke. I tell on him. I feel a rush of relief as I tell the story to a speech therapist, and then immediately I'm flooded with nausea. I hope I don't throw up. His therapist asks him not to practice the alphabet anymore until he's had more sessions. He readily agrees, throwing me a look that says he would rather listen to her than listen to me. I glare at him. Then I get up, excuse myself from their session, and go to the nearest restroom and cry without opening my mouth or making a single sound.
Mhm. The frustration I mean, you've done such a beautiful job showing us how that frustration grows and ebbs and grows and yeah, go on, please.
Yeah, so the next story, so that was in the first section, which is his first stroke. This next story I'm going to read is actually after he's had his second stroke. So he had a second stroke 5 years later, and this is a little over 2 years after that. And it's called Loss of Identity. I'm in the basement sorting through boxes of old papers and books, trying to clear out some clutter before we put the house on the market. Since we have lived in this house for almost 20 years, we've collected a whole lot of stuff. It's mid-morning on a weekday. I'm going through a box of papers and books from Tim's college days. He says he doesn't want any of it, but I'm hesitant to check it out without looking through it first. I am definitely the collector in the family. As I go through a box to sort what can be recycled, I set aside a few things Tim wrote years ago and some papers I think may be interesting to him. While sorting, I find more than 20 letters from some of the top colleges and universities in the country, all offering him acceptance into their graduate programs. I'm shocked. These are not easy schools to get into. He's never mentioned this. Not once has he ever boasted about being pursued in this way. Not once. The letters are all dated just after he graduated from college with degrees in electrical engineering and computer science. I grab the letters and head up the stairs to the living room where Tim is drinking a cup of coffee and watching the kids play. Oh, yeah, by the way, we have kids now. I ask him about the stack of letters I'm holding in my hand, and he says he never wanted to go to graduate school, so he just ignored them. He says he's surprised he even kept them. He says he wanted to be done with school and go to work. I am speechless. I turn and head back into the basement, reluctantly toss the letters into the bag of recycling. The heaviness I feel in my chest is huge. The weight of his loss is overwhelming. His identity is so intertwined with his work with computers. Because of the challenges caused by his 2 large strokes, he's had to give up that dream, that identity. Who is he without that identity? No wonder he's angry. No wonder he's depressed. Throughout life, we all collect identities. Some of them are keepers. Some of them can be chucked out like old papers. How do we find our bearings when an identity is stripped away? This may be the first time I can truly relate to Tim's pain. We have both had identities stripped away and new identities assigned that were not of our choosing. We are both struggling to find our footing in a world that is dramatically shifting beneath us. And I have an afterthought. It says, years later, I find myself thinking a lot about caregivers and identity. It's interesting how I, as a caregiver, willingly and with much resentment, gave up my own identity in an effort to help my husband find his way back to his identity that was shattered by his brain injuries. I can see how I was primed as a woman to take on this role. I can see how my identity became inextricably tied to his well-being at the expense of my own. It makes sense to me now why there are high rates of depression for caregivers. We are shamed by ourselves and others if we choose not to shed our own identity when we care for a loved one. The expectations are crushing.
I think that's a big part of the value for me in the book that you've written, is that even though you felt that societal expectation, and even though you complied with societal expectation to a very great extent, you held on to who you really are. And even though you suppressed it, it was there. And like in the first story where, and many of the other vignettes, if I may call them that, you admit to being irritated. You admit to being less than perfect. And that is what I have not seen in other books that are dealing with a topic like this, is who you are is solid enough that you are able to admit who you are and put it out there. Whereas most people just try to shine everybody on and pretend like they never yell at their husband, and or whoever it is that they're caregiving, and that's just not real. So it's a huge part of what I appreciate about your book.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I remember when my partner had a stroke, the only book I could find was My Stroke of Insight, which just kind of made it sound like a wonderful experience, which is kind of bizarre to look at it that way because it's so horrible. So I couldn't find anything that talked about what it's really like. And your book does a great job of that.
I'll agree. My husband had developed a seizure disorder out of nowhere, also in our 40s. And I was not the best caregiver, but I was the caregiver. And there were a lot of things as you wrote, and I listened to you, reading what you had written, and of course made into the book now, where it's sort of like, that is how I felt at the time, and I didn't even realize I was suppressing the whole thing too. And I'm the caregiver, I'm the strong one, and it wasn't true. And looking back with a little time in between it and hearing what you've written, it's like, I wish I had this book at the time so I could know it was okay to be irritated and not the super caregiver. And I mean, yeah, the book is I wish I had the book at the time. So now it's out.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. And I think, to be fair, it's like hindsight is 2020, because at the time I wrote the book, I was able to tap into that, but I didn't share what I was feeling other than with my journal, really with anyone. I just, because, I had 2 little kids, and I had, I wanted to be seen as doing a good job, and, so all that societal crap, it's like, just, yeah. And that was strong. And it was really hard for me to make the decision to leave. I mean, I just was so ingrained in so many years of therapy of wanting to leave, but those, norms around what you do as a wife when your partner is disabled, it's like there's nothing out there that says go ahead and leave your disabled husband. It was all, stand by your man and sacrifice your life. And I'm just like, I was just slowly dying inside. And so, yeah, so that was a big journey, and this takes place over many, many years. The next story I'll read, and then I'll open it up for more questions, is in the last section of the book where we do decide to divorce. And a couple years before the divorce, we actually had an uncoupling ceremony, which I'll read about this. It's called Uncoupling, and it's 10 years and 10 months after his first stroke. So there's a lot of years in between there. It says, Tim and I are dressed in our finest casual clothing. It's a beautiful fall day, and we're standing in a cozy hotel room at one of our favorite resorts at the beach. Even though there are only a handful of people at this gathering, the energy in the room radiates big excitement and lots of love. I'm surprisingly nervous. The nerves are familiar, taking me back to those wedding day jitters all those years ago. This isn't a wedding, though. It's a ceremony to honor the beginning, middle, and ending of our marriage. It's been more than a decade since the first stroke, and a lot of things have changed. Today, we are formally reciting new, more appropriate vows. We are here to honor our uncoupling process and publicly state our new agreements to each other in the presence of our children and a couple of dear friends. Vowing to be friends, co-parents, family, letting go of spouse, husband, wife. We stand here listening to some of the same words spoken on our wedding day. I find it interesting that words spoken in a wedding ceremony are also applicable in an uncoupling. I breathe in the beautiful words and connect to their meaning in a new way. I am reminded of these words by Khalil Gibran, also spoken in our wedding ceremony. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. These words bring a deep sense of relief, and I find myself breathing out blessings of hope to Tim, to my daughters, and to myself. We are finding a new way to love each other, to love one another. We stand here holding hands, looking into each other's eyes with love, kindness, and the pride that only comes with having done something really well. I feel the tears flowing down my cheeks as our 8-year-old daughters sing a song about sanctuary to bring the ceremony to a close. Such a magical moment. I have an afterthought here. It says, although our legal divorce didn't come until many months later, it was that beautiful ceremony that truly marked the ending of our marriage and supported us in moving forward with commitment to ourselves, our children, and each other in a uniquely kind and loving way. I discovered that relationships can move through healthy changes. I learned that a marriage can end in a way that allows children to remain deeply connected to both parents.
There are not a lot of divorces that end on that note.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to read a poem that's toward the end of the book called Freedom. It's a short poem. It says, there are times in life when connections become the ties that bind. So we sever the ties, gather the threads, and weave the fabric of freedom.
I feel like contrasting your book a little bit with Sulima's memoir, because she also, her memoir, she leaves out, well, you don't leave out painful parts. You look at them from a different way. And I see like a connection between the two of those. If I were to write a memoir, it'd probably be a typical memoir of, and then this person was terrible. And then this, salacious story, both of yours are very gentle.
Mhm.
Of course, you have kids who can read this one day. Have they read it?
My kids?
Yeah.
No. And we've talked about it. I would like them to wait until they're older because it's, I don't know if they're mature enough to be able to hold the complexity of him not being or either one of us, both of us being not at our best in some of the stories. And just, brain injuries, I think I say this in there, is, brain injuries are assholes. I mean, they make people do really awful things. And I'm not ready for my kids to do that. So we've talked about it. They know it's there. They know they can read it when they're older. They're only 13 now, so it's a little young.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I think is true for both of us is that if we had written our books 10 years ago, we would have written them very differently because, that the frustration, the anger, all of that is too fresh. And with time, things, you form a different perspective. And I think that's valuable. I think that's valuable. In some cases, not, as I've said before, not every story is mine to tell. And maybe sometimes it's best to leave it for that person if they choose to tell it or not. So I saw a couple of hands go up. Barb, you were going to say something, and Yvonne was wanting to say something.
Well, I have not read your book. And I was deciding whether I wanted to. I wanted to hear exactly what it was about. I have been both a caregiver and now have a caregiver. 30 years ago, my son was in an accident and he became traumatically brain injured. He recovered sufficiently to lead a decent life. However, taking care of him while being a single parent and having 2 other children, I know what you're saying. You're trying to be everything to everybody. And if you don't do it, you feel guilty. Skip forward to 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And at the time, I was not living with my daughter, which I am doing now. Therefore, eventually, current day, she is my caregiver. However, in Parkinson's, I think you will appreciate this. We don't call them caregivers. We call them care partners, which I think is far more fitting because you are in partnership with this person. You are sharing a life, and both are important. The partner, and the patient. And at the beginning, you kind of get your nose on a joint because, oh, poor Peter, who was in the accident. And meanwhile, I'm working 40 hours a week, and one older one is in college, the other one is in high school. It's almost impossible. But you do it because if you don't, you get criticized. The reason I wanted to investigate your book is that I have been a member of support groups for a while. And I try to see the others, and especially since my daughter is now my care partner, I try to see the other side of it. And you have now shown me that you have written realistically. And I will now read the book. And I believe I'll be able to recommend it to my next Parkinson's support group for caregivers, care partners. I know my daughter gets frustrated. I want her to have a life. But she's worried about what her brothers will think if she cares about herself, which is wrong. You know it's wrong. So I think it will give me more insight into how to help her through this. And I do appreciate your writing in that, with that attitude of telling the truth about how you feel or felt.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I love the distinction of a care partner versus a caregiver. And I think probably today I would list that I am a care partner with my former husband, because I still help him with things. But I think by letting go of the marriage, I do it because I choose to, not because I'm obliged to.
Yes. Mhm.
And it sounds like that's the relationship with your daughter, is that it's chosen rather than obligated, but,
Yes, I certainly hope so.
no, thank you for your kindness.
Mm.
Appreciate it.
So I have a question for you, Barbara.
Mhm.
The daughter that you live with, was she the one in high school or the one in college?
High school.
So she was living with her brother while he was going
Her?
through.
No, she was living with me and well, her father had left many years ago. He didn't have any connection after he left other than to call them when he was inebriated. And he is really he has since died and is out of their lives altogether, although they did try to treat him like a human being, which he did not do to them. So she was on her own in New York City for a good many years. And it was only after 9/11 that she came out of the city. And we eventually got to Chattanooga. She came to help me because I broke my wrist. And her brother, who I was staying with, happened to be away. I was supposed to be house sitting. And then I broke my wrist in boxing class. Anyway, she came down to Chattanooga and stayed, got an apartment, and now has returned to New York City, back in the theater. And she's very happy with her job. And I want her to stay happy with her job. So I think if I read the whole book, I would get a better sense of how she is feeling, even though it's somewhat like how I felt when I was taking care of her brother.
Mhm. Mhm. Mm. Yeah.
We all have complicated lives.
For sure, for sure.
So Yvonne, what were you going to?
I hope my internet is unstable and there's a lot of distortion. How am I sounding
You're sounding okay right now.
right now? Okay. My question, Devon, is what would have helped you? What is there anything or any, I'm coming from the vantage point of the medical profession, but also having been through this myself. And I wonder if there's a place to turn that could have provided you with more support and permission to not be perfect. And it's just hard to know. I mean, I felt like no one, well, I never took advantage of support groups personally because I felt like people would turn to me to support them, and I'd be too busy taking care of them to really get help for myself. And like when I had breast cancer, I didn't go to a support group, even though I read that it's supposed to improve your chances. So I'm not sure I would have gone to a support group for families of stroke victims for that reason, because I'm the helper. Everybody knows, well, you're the doctor, you're supposed to help people. You're a therapist. You may end up giving advice or counseling support to people, but what would have helped you?
Yeah, so we did go to support groups, but they were support groups for stroke survivors. So I would go because somebody had to take him. So I was there as the caregiver. But it was hugely helpful because there was community, and that was helpful. I think what would have helped me at the time, I mean, in hindsight, of course, I could have been more open with my friends. I could have been more open with my family about what I was going through. My nature was to just suck it up and hold it all in. And I think it ended up really harming me physically and
Mhm.
emotionally. I think I wrote the book that I needed. So I wrote this book for my younger self. So that hopefully somebody else can like have a sense of, oh, okay, there's a third way. You don't have to just, do this in this way. I would have been more open to ending my marriage a lot sooner. I just thought for some reason I had it in my head that that was the worst thing I could do. As opposed to actually that was really the best thing for both of us. To really get out from underneath those roles so that we could actually support each other in a really different way.
Have any of your adult family members read your book and come to a new understanding or said anything to you about their new understanding?
Yeah. I mean, and just to kind of start, so the first person that read my book was Tim. Other than my writing group, I wouldn't have published it if he didn't feel comfortable with that, because it is, like Sulima said, it's his story, but it's told through my lens, my truth. And even though it's not exactly how he would tell it, he was very supportive and actually wants people to know more about what it's like from his perspective as well. But since then, some of my family have read it. My mom read it. I think it was really hard for my mom because for her to see how much pain I was in, and she didn't know. And and I think that's been kind of true across the board with my friends as well. But I think, to be fair to myself and to my friends, it's like when I was with my friends, I didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted a break from it. It's like I was 24/7 caring for, a disabled husband and two little kids. I'm just like, I don't want to wallow in that. I just wanted to have this go do something that feels different. So there wasn't really a space for that. So I guess one of the things I would hope for is to have a space where I could be honest and open about it, maybe a caregiver support group, an honest one, not one that tells you how to do it better, because those existed, but one that allows you to just let all your, raw, ugly show as you're going through it. That would have been helpful. And maybe that will, something will come out of that.
I was going,
I'm
excuse me.
debating whether to. Oh, sorry.
You're
I'm sorry.
kind of in and out there, Yvonne. And now you're
I
frozen.
know, it's frustrating. It's like having aphasia.
Yeah.
If you put your question in chat, Yvonne, we could read it out while Kay asks her.
There's children.
How I would have answered Yvonne's question was if Tim's insurance had covered that psychiatric coordinator person.
The physiatrist, or
I can't remember what.
I think it's a
physiatrist.
That actually makes more sense than psychiatrist. But I guess my head is just remembering it wrong. But to have had support and to have had somebody that could do all of the insurance stuff. So
Administrative stuff. Yeah.
The administrative stuff. So my sister had early onset Alzheimer's. Her stepdaughter and her stepdaughter's wife were caring for her. I mean, she was in assisted living, but they were the daily people making sure she took her meds and all that stuff. And I was 180 miles away, and I was able to do a lot of the administrative stuff and do that. And so, I mean, that was all I could do. I couldn't be there. I didn't, I mean, I tried to call her on the phone and all that stuff, but I couldn't go and check in the way that they could because I was too far away. But just parceling that out, I mean, it's huge. I mean, literally, it's a full-time job to deal with all the insurance stuff that you had to deal with, and the disability and the paperwork and getting the doctors. Sometimes it's a full-time job to get the doctors to fill out the paperwork correctly for the disability.
Yeah,
So.
that was a challenge. And the fact that, and I don't know if this is still true, this has been, almost 15 years ago, but nobody was talking to anybody else. So like the speech therapist wasn't
Still
talking to the
true.
primary, wasn't talking to the neurologist. So it was really on me to keep the communication going. And it was another way that, I was good at it. So I just kept ignoring my own health and ignoring my own stuff because I was so busy doing all this coordination of care for him. But yes, that would have been nice. I don't know how realistic it is unless somebody has lots of money, but we couldn't afford to have that person. It wasn't covered by insurance, so there was just no way we could do it.
Yep.
Well, it's not just the communication of back and forth. You have to learn what all of these people know. You can't just go and say, well, my neurologist said this, and I don't know what it means. And the speech pathologist, I mean, you have to understand what each doctor is saying and then go explain it to a different doctor. I mean, you should give us doctorates at the end of it.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to carry.
Devon, one thing to say in support of support groups. And I have been in support groups in Albuquerque, Albany, New York, here, and Chattanooga. So most of them, at least one time during the Parkinson's support group, we divide into two separate rooms. Caregivers, partners on one side, patients on the other. And I'm sure it turns out to be a right session because that's what it's for. But so you do get the support from the others that are there, and you're speaking apples and apples. So you have to look, if you go to one, if anyone goes to one, investigate and see if they see both sides of the story.
Yeah, I think the challenge that I had with that is that my husband had aphasia. So basically I was his voice, so I didn't get to leave to
Exactly.
Yeah, so but there still could have been something created separately
Yes.
Yeah, so I agree.
What I like about this book, I mean, when this happened to us, we were in Hawaii, and there's not medical care. Like for a couple of years, there was no neurologist on any of the islands. There just wasn't anybody. But there definitely wasn't support groups, things like that. And so having a book that, you can get and read on your own would have been handy. But I can see this book being read in support groups, being read by individuals who can't get to one. I mean, it's so, you've taken the knowledge and you've made it mobile for so many people.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, my partner had the aftermath of his stroke was mostly during COVID, and everything was locked down. So support groups weren't really an option. In fact, visits weren't an option for most of it.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, that's just awful. Yeah. That would have been another layer of hell on top of what I was going through.
And
Good description.
it was for everyone.
Mm.
I'm actually thinking about sending this book to his children because they were there for a lot of it. And, you know, it may help them too.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I need to go because it's just too frustrating with the internet going in and out, and
Mm.
your faces are mostly frozen and your voices are distorted.
Aw.
I'm sorry.
Aw.
I
No
wish
worries.
I
It
could
was
fix
great
it.
seeing you. I'm glad
Nice
you
to
were
see you.
here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Nice to
it was
see
good
you.
to have you with us, Yvonne.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So is it coincidence that most of the people here have been a caretaker for someone with a brain injury, or is it that common?
I think it's more common than you know.
It must be. I thought I was the only one, I mean, honestly. For a
Isn't
long
that
time.
always the way, though? You always think you're the only one.
No one else has ever been through this.
Yeah, yeah. And you find out
Well,
that it's everywhere.
Yeah. And when you get to a certain age, even midlife, it's like you're going to be caring for, an aging parent or a spouse or a child or, there.
Mhm.
And I think there's no shock to me that we're all women that are here too. So there's,
Right.
but yeah. Okay.
And my handle on the internet for probably 4 years was caretaker in the Hawaiian word, kapuhi. I was like, this is what I am now.
Mhm. Yes, you do lose your identity.
Yeah.
Many times over.
I think I'm remembering that in part one of the book, you become aware very early on that you have given up your voice, that you have lost your voice. And then there's no more mention of that. As things get better, this is after the first stroke, when you're gone back to work part-time, and you're asked that question about when you're going to recover your voice. And then things continue to get better and better and better. And we don't hear anything about that again for a long time. I think that your optimism and just your celebration of the fact that things did get so much better. And you got the children, and Tim was a beautiful dad. And then of course it surfaced again after the second stroke and all the changes that brought with it. It was impossible to ignore that anymore.
Yeah.
Beautiful job. I think you did such a beautiful job of, you acknowledged your frustrations and your angers and your suppression of all of that. And you gave Tim the credit for the pain that he suffered as well. I think that's what part of what makes the book so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I truly believe that, as hard as it was for me, I had choices. I had the ability to, make changes, and that he doesn't have, he's, yeah. So I have a lot of compassion for his space that he's in and will always in some ways be in. It's a hard road. And it was, after the first stroke, he did recover. He went back to work full time, back doing the job he loved. I felt very partnered again, like we were back to, having two people that were equally contributing to our life. And then when the second stroke hit and they finally discovered that he has a rare blood clotting disorder that wasn't discovered 5 years prior, and the second stroke was very different. It affected him in a very different way. He became a very different person. I was really naive because I just thought, oh, we beat the first one, we're gonna beat it again. And it just didn't look like that at all. And at some point, you just have to accept that this is not going to go the way you want it to go. And I had 2 little kids.
Mhm.
So, and I had a lot of choices about what do I want this to look like? My parents had a bitter divorce when I was a teenager. And I write about this in the book, but they didn't talk again. I mean, they saw each other a couple of times over the 40 years after that. But even when my brother died, they didn't talk. And I thought, I don't want that for my kids. I want my kids to have 2 parents that aren't
Mhm.
married, but are still friends and still communicate and love them and will be in pivotal moments in their lives without this weirdness. And that became kind of the driver for me, was to do it well. And we did.
Mhm.
And we're living that life now.
What else? What else do you want to say to Devon or to ask?
You're working on 8 books.
Yeah, well, not, yeah. I have like 8 ideas going and I write a little bit on different ones at different times. Nothing's bubbled to the top as what's going to be next, other than I did apply for a poetry fellowship through Literary Arts for the 3rd time. We'll see, find out in January. But I am, I after I wrote this book, and I mean, it took a long time, I said, I'm not going to write anything. I'm not going to write a memoir. I'm not going to write anything that's heavy or healing or any of that. And every idea is something was going to be probably a healing book. So that's probably where it's.
Have you considered doing a TED Talk?
I don't know. That's like, those who know me, and it's like, this is about as far out of my comfort zone with talking, but
That's the idea, isn't it?
yeah, I don't know.
Mhm.
We'll see.
Well, there are all kinds of possibilities out there for you, Devon. That's the thing. You've opened the door now.
Yeah,
You've opened the
and
door.
and I think that one thing that I'm really clear on is I don't want to become a spokesperson for caregiving. I'm a writer. This is my my love is with the writing. I'm happy that I was able to write a book that has touched some people, and I hope it continues to do so. But I really wrote it for me and to heal, and the what's personal is universal kind of thing. But so whatever my next book is, I hope that it will also be something that's truth telling and honoring of whatever journey that is. And I know Chrissy is here. Chrissy's known me since way back. We're since junior high school. And I mean, writing has always been my love, and I've always hid it away. And
Why don't you perhaps try a book of essays on a completely different subject, like visiting the beach or finding a new friend. As you said, everything, all your thoughts are healing thoughts. And I can see that because you don't want to dwell on it. Now that it's out, put it aside.
Yeah. Oh,
But
absolutely.
it's a very difficult thing to do. But I think you will find a way.
Yeah. And I feel very much like it was a healing. I wrote the book. I did a lot of therapy while I was writing the book. And now that it's out there, I feel very released from it. I feel very healed from it. But there's other parts of my life that I still have, some things that I would like to say, I guess, one around adoption. I have a lot of anger that exists in that world about how our culture and cultures around the world view adoption and treat people. So that I've got some, some, I guess, fire in me on that.
You
So
mean people with real kids, with their own real kids?
Mm,
And feel about that.
yeah, real.
that is like, yeah, the fingernails down the chalkboard. But
Yeah.
couldn't you have your own? It's
Mhm.
like, oh, yeah. And it's, to be fair, it's like those biases live in me too. And I would like to kind of shine some light on the narratives that live around adoption. And it feels like it would be a gift I could give to my kids who are both adopted. But it's not going to be the light little children's book that I was hoping to write. Although I do have a children's book in there that I might write. I don't know.
You can do both.
Yeah. And I do have a job, so I have to do that too. So, yeah. Chrissy, did you want to say anything?
Okay, let's see if I can.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Oh. I just would say that reading Devon's book reminded me of really showed me what a gifted writer she is, because it was so honest and so emotional. And like she mentioned earlier, her friends, we got together once a year, but we did not realize what she was going through. So reading the book kind of helped us to really understand how much she was going through and what she's been through. And I cannot wait to read more of your writing, because it is just so powerful, and your poetry as well. I love so much. So
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
You might even consider fiction.
Mm.
I mean, fiction is a wonderful way to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have to protect anyone's feelings.
Mm.
That was a character decision. That's not about you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I've never actually lived in that space, and it's always been truth stuff. I don't know.
I think if you want the truth, you read a good novel. That's
Yeah, I don't know that I could. Yeah, I could. I don't know that I could create it that way. It would just morph back into memoir. It's like,
Devon, one of the projects that I'm playing with right now is I'm still struggling to figure out how my mother became the totally non-maternal person that she was. And so it was like, what would her life have been like if she'd had the opportunities that I did? And so taking something that was a writing prompt that Sulima gave us way back when, which was, I think, to introduce yourself through writing a story where something was going along in your real life, but then, you know, the path not taken, and something else happened, and what would your life have been like if you had this other path? So in this thought project that I'm doing, my mother, when she's 15, shows up in the town that I was living in the math class that I was in. And because she's there at 15, she never meets my father. So I don't exist. So I disappear, my siblings disappear, my parents disappear. Presumably my father is alive somewhere, but not, his life didn't. Anyway, so then she's there and meets my friend. So it's still like my life story in a way, because she meets my friends, my math teacher, my, all these things. But it's fascinating, the things, the way that my mother makes different decisions and whatever. And it's all fiction, obviously, because it's all just out of my head. But
Wow.
so I'm not somebody that's written much fiction either. But this
No,
is.
I love that. That sounds really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I am playing around with a book about, some stories about my dad and the relationship I've created with him since he died. Which is kind of bizarre, but just this relationship that we are able to have that we were not able to have when he was alive. And that's been kind of interesting and fun to play with. Yeah, I don't know what's next, but I'm, as those of you that are writers know, I'm out here marketing my own book. So it's like, that's taking some of my extra time right now. But I have decided I'm not doing it with any hustle energy. So I'm just going into it with gratitude and a little bit of time every day and allowing it to just go where it needs to go. And it's been
It'll show itself to you eventually, and you'll say, oh, there it is. And it was there all the time.
Yeah, and it's been getting into libraries and bookstores, and I'm just happy with that. And I'm not making it my job, because marketing is not where my love lives. So
Well, ladies, I need to move around some, so I will say goodnight. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Devon, and the rest of you. Thank you for writing this, and I will put some comments on your page eventually.
thank you, Barbara. It was nice. It was nice meeting you as well.
Always good to see you. I know it's a little later where you are than it is here. So.
Oh, yeah.
Good night, my dear.
Good night.
Hey, Barbara.
And I have another engagement as well, so I'm going to bow out, but this was wonderful to hear your stories and to get to listen to Devon being highlighted. So thank you for inviting me, Devon, and everyone take care.
You too,
Thanks,
Chrissy.
Thank you.
Hi, Devon. This is Trish, and
Hi,
I have to
Trish.
admit I've been struggling with. I had to do an update right before this meeting, and I've been struggling on how to do stuff. And I just figured out how to unmute. So, so now I can talk.
It's nice to hear your voice.
So anyway, I'm looking forward to reading your book. I've got a lot of projects going on here in the summer, so I think that's going to be more of a fall. That's when I kind of do reading and that kind of stuff. But I really enjoyed, and it was nice to hear everyone's perspective and stuff. And we all have a story. I have a story with my husband, and and my mom and everything. So it was good to get your perspective on it. And I'm really looking forward to reading your book. And I've been out in the mountains and I've been huckleberry picking, so I'm not presentable. So I didn't turn on the video if I even could have figured it out. And I have very noisy dogs, so it was probably a good thing I figured out how to mute early on, or you'd heard a bunch of dogs barking the whole time. But anyway, I appreciate you inviting, and I enjoyed this little Zoom meeting. So, and I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thanks, Trish, for being here. Hang in there. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us.